back to the keeping us on point. I figured before we go into any questions, I printed up just a couple things on Valentine's Day, because I think everyone knows when they ask a rabbi or somebody, do Jews celebrate Valentine's Day? And you always hear this answer, well, it's not a Jewish holiday. And Valentine's Day is every day. That's how I always heard it. It's like, you don't need a day on the calendar. And in fact, if you don't celebrate this day, it's cheaper. I mean, roses go up for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
The cards are quite expensive.
And they're usually dead.
Are they? I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I've seen some very nice red roses, just put it out. I know that when we do the Shabbat dinners and it ends up being on Valentine's week, the only store that doesn't go up in cost on roses is Trader Joe's.
Really?
See, I'm Jewish. I know this.
I went into Fry's yesterday. I thought the whole store became a flower.
Really?
You never saw so many plants. In the lawn, when you enter the entry, there were plants there.
Anyways, I heard this year people are buying eggs instead of flowers.
Yours expensive is the roses. Go to Trader Joe's. They're $2.99 for the large.
For eggs. You see, it was worth coming today, just so you can learn to buy eggs.
So 5 dozens for under 14.
Yeah.
It was 14.49.
Yeah.
39.
Yeah, well, yeah, Jen,
This is, we try to, we want to, well-rounded.
This is not useful. I always have the last word. Yes, dear.
So that's your Valentine's Day tip. We'll go around the table for that later. But on a serious note, what would be the hesitation in Judaism about this holiday? So I think the shortest answer to that question is, where is or what is the origin of it?
Thank God.
Thank you. So, right. So if it's a holiday that comes from the Catholic Church, that would be one issue for Jews to celebrate a holiday based off of their holiday. And then the question is, if theirs actually comes from something else, which might be pagan, which is its own, another holiday problem, the Cupids and all the different celebrations that might be associated with it. I printed something up because I'd actually never heard this. But here it was. In the 800s, the church adapted many pagan holidays into Christian holidays. And I have no clue how to pronounce this. Samhain became All Hallows Eve, or also known as Halloween. Yule became Christmas, and Easter became Easter. Similarly, a holiday called Lupercalia became Valentine's Day. It was a fertility festival dedicated to Faunus, the Roman god of agriculture. And this shares like some of the interesting customs or traditions within that holiday. But the point is as Jews, are we meant to celebrate these holidays that are not based on our own religion and come from another religion? In other words, they're not neutral holidays. And that's really the question that each of us have to really analyze as Jews. What are we celebrating? What's the real story behind the holiday, or the traditions that are coming to us and that we want to bring into our lives? And is that what we want to bring into our lives? But of course, celebrating love is definitely not an issue in Judaism. And like, you hear from these other rabbis, that's something for every day. You don't need a day for that. But Judaism does have a day for that, believe it or not, in Jewish tradition. And that is Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, which is always in the summer. And that has to do with, it was called the holiday of love, but there's always a slightly different perspective that we bring into this holiday. So when you look, today's holiday is totally all about the external factors of love. If you think about it, there's a lot of besides for, of course, flowers and chocolates and cards, but who's your Valentine? Will you be my Valentine? It's this whole process of the external part of love, good looks, and everything with that. In the Jewish one, to quote one of the things that they bring out in the Talmud when they speak about what was Tu B'Av, what was the 15th of Av, they said that the young women who were single, would go into the vineyards wearing all white. So if you ever saw a white party in summer, it's based off of that tradition. And they would look for men they want for shidduchim, as they say, for marriage. But one of the things that they would say, and I'm just to quote it properly, is beauty is vain. I'm going to get the exact quote in the English, but this is from Proverbs, from King Solomon. where they say it says a woman who is God-fearing should be respected or should be seen. So this is, we have it, it's all about the character. All right, look for somebody who is of good character. And so when you think about it, what is good character in Judaism? Like, what are our holidays really about? When you think about it, Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, we don't celebrate it with beer and fireworks, but we talk about charity, right? The three things that Rosh Hashanah the theme of Rosh Hashanah is repentance, so teshuvah, prayer, and tzedakah. Even when you look at Passover, one of the first passages in the Seder is whoever is hungry should come and eat. So our value system is very different than the value system that we find in society. And maybe that's another part to this conversation is what value system are we bringing into our lives when we celebrate these types of holidays that our world celebrates or our country celebrates. I'm not talking about Independence Day. I'm talking about this type of a holiday. And that might be the third factor. It's if I am going to celebrate it, because we're all a product of our society. Let's say you choose to celebrate. It's part of the things you're going out for dinner tonight or whatever it is. How do you make it more Jewish, right? So you're doing it anyways. I'm not here to tell people what to do. How do you try to move the focus away from the external love and to make into the more meaningful and real love? And then the question, of course, is what is real love? That's another conversation, but Judaism has something to say about that. All right, we talk about the famous quote from Hillel when a person comes and says, I want to convert to Judaism. We can close that door, by the way. If it's, I see her, just thank you. So when we think about love, what is love? And I'm not going into the marriage love, but when Judaism talks about love and the emphasis on love, it says that when this person came to Hillel and he said, I want to convert while I stand on one foot, how do you sum up the entire Jewish Torah? Well, slightly different. He says, what you don't want, what you hate to be done to yourself, don't do unto others. Like that's, if you love yourself, you should love others the very same way.
Right.
If you don't love yourself, we have a different problem, right? That's its own beast. But the point is that love sums up the entire Torah. Love of self is included in that, right? If you love yourself, I always love this story. There was a pitcher, I think from the Kansas City Royals, that was given a $12 million contract. All he had to do was show up for spring training, and that contract goes into effect. But he was already kind of injured the year before, and he decided before going into spring training that he's not going to show up because he said, I can't take this money if I don't really work for it. He knew that he was injured. He's not going to be playing. He's pretty much over his career. But showing up, he said, that means I don't even love myself. I'm taking someone else's money that I don't deserve. So loving yourself is a lot of work for many people. Others have too much of that, as we know, just to be out, to put that out there. But this is the idea of, or the many different, I'm going to say, conversations within Valentine's Day itself. On its basic level, it's not a Jewish holiday. But even if it was something Jewish, this idea of the holiday of love, what does love look like? What is this holiday that we celebrate? And we have a lot of text that really gives some insight into that. So that is just my opening statement for today. If you want to, since it is a day on the calendar, there's always something to be learned. And if you own a store, good for you. Sell a lot of chocolate.
And Janet would say that's a good start, but
The chocolate part, or the?
no, your part was a good start,
But she still wants the chocolate and the roses. Exactly.
chocolate.
Just chocolate. I have to ask my wife. She took our kids to the dentist today. I wonder if they were giving out chocolates. Yeah, for sure.
Don't do that.
No, I know, but I was, who knows? It's Valentine's Day. They got to do something.
But it's interesting how you were saying that the holidays that we celebrate, like Valentine's Day or those things, but the newer holidays, it appears that get on the calendar, like President's Day or Martin Luther King Day or something like that, seem to me to be more relatable as Jews, because when you said it, because it's about the character. So it's remembering the people and who they were.
Right.
And so it seems to me, although they're not the same as Valentine's and Christmas, except there's also sales and all the stores, and we don't celebrate those properly either. Or Memorial Day, for example,
Right.
would be one of those that maybe, and we certainly know that in Judaism, Memorial was.
It's important, yeah, for sure.
You also talk about love, and we're also taught to love Israel. But this is what I want to talk about, is what's going on in Israel today makes it very difficult for us to love Israel. And how do we balance this?
All right, hold on. I'm going to get to that. Not that I know the answers. Will be a good discussion on that in a minute. But before that, actually, one other thought on this, kind of I like what you mentioned, right? There are the holidays that are holidays. They have a lot of pomp and fare. And then there are the ones that we, as a newer society in a newer country, added to our list of holidays. And I do agree, those are the ones that you find more meaning and more connection to. And that's why we even have the conversations, whether we like them or not. Should Columbus Day be a holiday now, or should it be Martin Luther King Day, or whatever, Indigenous People Day? These conversations are because they were holidays that, let's say, started 200 years ago, and what was relevant to them is maybe less relevant to us, and the federal government doesn't want to add another day off. So it's like, which one should be the recognized holiday? But it really is about this connection, that we connect to it and it means something to us, and that's why we celebrate it. Which in Judaism, nothing to do with these holidays specifically, that is what we call customs. And customs are kind of the more relevant things that we do in the sense of the practices that we do, because we initiated those. They had meaning to us, whether it was to a family or to a community, and we added that into the things that we do. So I totally understand.
On the other hand, though, I guess that if we took that further to how we as Jews are supposed to act, and in my mind, it's that part of us that makes us the example for the world, and this chosenness is about showing the right way, the right character, and the right whatever. Is that why should there have to be days to remember people's characters? Because if we just all lived in a world where we respected everyone else and all the things we think about, Martin Luther King or whatever it is, or Indigenous people, if we just as a society could learn to all live together and respect each other and feel that we all have value, we wouldn't have to have these special days. And I think that in Judaism, that's what we're taught, is to just live that way from the inside out, and that's your core. So you don't have to have a special day for Valentine's or for Abraham's Day or Moses's Day or whatever that might be, because you just internally function that way.
Right. Now I understand that. There's actually a Hebrew statement. It says, Mimenu yiru v'chein yasu. From them you should see and do. Right. So in that respect, that doesn't mean you make a holiday for it, right? I think many Jewish families put pictures up on their wall. People that, I know a lot of teenagers do this too, of people that they respect. But as you get older, those pictures are no longer celebrities that might be in your garage or something, but rather a very important family figure, or maybe a larger figure in life. Whether for some people in the 70s, that might have been John F. Kennedy. For others, each person to whoever they connected with. That's right. I mean, I'm looking here. You have, so that's in our, we put a picture of the Rebbe, and there are people say, why are you putting a picture of a rabbi? And the idea is, like, if you look at somebody and you appreciate them, hopefully that image will inspire you. So we do believe they're not holidays.
When the pictures, isn't there something where the art was not?
I know.
Strongly in Judaism.
Yes. So
I mean,
yeah. So not that they became idol worship, but the Torah says you shouldn't make any images, graven images. And the question is, are pictures or sculptures considered images that would or could be idolatry or idols? So yeah, it's a good point. And that is a big debate. There are people who take that so far that they want family pictures hanging up in their home. How many people? Very few. I'm saying that's how far you could take that argument.
That was what the name, my name is Asher Glad, who wrote that, what? Iron Polka.
And they have no pictures?
What the artist went through, because it was considered a heretic because he was
Right.
a painter.
I do know that some people will not use sculptures because of that. Or if they have a sculpture, it's going to be missing something to kind of make sure it's not considered an actual image that could be considered this prohibition. But to use a quote, which I liked, and I don't know how this would fit into that, I was going to use it for the Valentine's Day part. It says that it is in the Talmud. It says that for every single thing that Judaism forbids, there is something that it permits that would kind of be in the same parallel. So if we say, to use Valentine's Day as the example, that Valentine's Day is not allowed, then there is going to be an equivalent Jewish something that is allowed. And let's say that's the 15th of Av. If we say that Halloween is not allowed, we have Purim, which actually has, again, a better messaging, which is not only are you dressing up, you're giving gifts to the poor, you're giving gifts to your friends. There's a more meaningful message within it. But again, I don't know how that works with, if you talk about pictures and stuff like that. I wasn't thinking about that when I saw that quote, but yeah.
We went into a whole Amish family. We have no. When I had my camera, he said to me, "You can take pictures. I have on this property." He said, "You can take pictures of anything around here, but not members of the family." Right. I said, "What about the dog?" He said, "The dog's okay."
So, and I don't, what did they say why? Or theirs is probably more about vanity. I mean, I don't know enough about, I have enough to study on our religion. I don't study, but I know that they have a big emphasis on just the vanity and stuff like that.
And he turned to us with the kids, and they were this big. He said, "You're not from these parts." He said, and Betty said, "You certainly are." And we started up a conversation. We ended up being invited to their home, which is unusual, because we ended up going out to dinner and people were staring, not because they were there, but because it was a mixed group.
Nice. It's a good problem. It's like, how did you guys, you must be related.
Second commandment.
What is it?
No grape, no.
Oh, I could have told you that.
No, Amish.
Oh, Amish commandments? Sorry. I couldn't have told you that. Yeah, I thought they're Christian of sorts, like they follow.
They still believe the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But is that, they associate that with pictures?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, that's how people kind of, this is why it's beautiful to have what we call the oral Torah. You don't look, a verse that just says something can be very misinterpreted. So if I looked at the verse and I would not do pictures, then I could be it could be misunderstood to say even a picture is a problem. So that's part of that discussion. But the Talmud would give you kind of the reasoning of how they come to that a painting would be fine, but not a sculpture. I'm using that as the example. I'm not saying sculptures cannot happen or should not be owned.
But does that make a difference if you're just looking at a picture as opposed to?
What's your intent?
Praying?
Of course, you make a good point. I could have a kosher image in my home and make it not kosher, right? Meaning not work with our law if I'm worshiping Ben Gurion or something. 100%.
So if I've done busts of my grandfather in the book, is that not considered kosher?
Well, it depends how good of an artist you are. I could, if you would like, I could research a bit more on that. I do know that with sculptures, there's a bigger conversation. And if it's not perfected, it might be
Well, it's not the whole body, it's just the
a
head,
bust.
so it means it's technically a bust.
People, I could look into that. I don't have any sculptures in my house, so I haven't researched that yet. But I've read that part of it would be to make sure they're not perfect, certain things, but I'm not saying that as a final thought here, because I honestly have never researched that. Yeah.
What if it's a sculpture of someone you don't know, or of a horse, or of a.
It's
not
art.
A graven image of my father or my mother that I would be worshiping. But some religions, praise.
I mean, I have a computer here. If you want, I can quickly, while we go to the next question, graven images. Sculpture. Judaism. You know, it's funny, I'm one of the ones that comes up is destroying statues and Judaism's prohibition of making graven images, obviously relevant issues. I'm looking for a short one. All right, we'll come back to this. I'll read up while we, or if not, it'll be after. So this is what the internet is for, right? But then you got to get a good source.
That's right.
So, should we come back to your question, or that's a big question?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I'll share something. I don't know.
My topic for today, so.
I know that you said we're taught to love the land. Who taught that?
Well,
Well,
he didn't know, but he didn't say that. That we're
I
taught to love Israel.
talked to.
Well, love. Okay, I already answered my question.
Yeah, it's the love of of Israel. Now, is it a love of the concept of Israel?
No, because it's funny. There is a quote that says "love of Israel," but it means the people. In other words, it says "love of God," "love of Israel." You know, like that's the. But it doesn't mean the country.
Or if it's just the people, then it's okay, because you're not worried about how the
Wow.
country how the country's run.
I think we
Yeah,
have a lot of
that's the-
country without having a lot of the government. During the previous administration, I had that problem, but I may be in a minority.
Everybody has problems.
Yeah, right.
But it's the difference between Zionism, which I think is the love of Israel, but the idea of the love of Israel on the land versus loving the
The concept,
the governmental entity called Israel, the political entity called Israel, and those are two different things. So I think, you know, and there's obviously been a lot, and I've been listening and hearing a lot from the rabbis I study with about the difference, you know, is there a difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? Can you be anti-Semitic and still Zionist? You know, all those kinds of big questions. And I think Zionism, in my mind, you can be anti-Semitic and not anti-Zionist.
Vice versa.
Actually, I read something really interesting on that. I'm going to try to get to that right after this part. But to answer your question, I mean, and this is obviously open for everyone to add their own insights. In America, where let's say you didn't like the previous administration, did that mean you hated America?
No.
So I look at it the same way. I think in life, everything's a roller coaster, right? You don't.
But their policies are, I'll give you for an instance. Their policies are going back to discriminating against the LGBT.
Are they though?
Yeah,
In
they are
Israel or here?
in Israel.
Well, they're doing that here too.
Well, I didn't even see anything for Israel like that. Where did you see that?
That's what the protests, one of the protests.
I thought it was more about the government and the judiciary, the
Well,
judicial.
the judiciary system is a whole different.
He wants to be able to change the Supreme Court rulings.
Well, I'll tell you the truth, like from reading about that, and feel free to, I also read a lot, but that doesn't mean it's all correct, right? But my basic understanding of this big thing right now is saying that a Supreme Court that can say a minister should not be a minister, because we feel that was one of the big contentious points after the fact. Our government can't even do that.
No, that's
So-
not my point, but the point was. There are people in Israel that are in the LBGQ
Oh, right.
community, and when you look at the way they're interpreting the strict Jewish laws, you can't be that and be Jewish.
Oh, that's definitely not Jewish.
And this is what's coming up from the
LGBTQ. So I have not seen that. I'm sure that there's probably some truth to their more, I don't want to say discrimination, but maybe more rigid law. I haven't seen anything on that, but I will tell you just a quick Jewish take on this before going to the Israel side of it is, in Judaism, even if you read the Torah, which says you cannot live a lifestyle of I'm gonna use gay just to pick on one. It does not say that people are not gay. So it's a very important distinction. The Torah says you can't do that lifestyle, right? So you can't engage in that sexual manner. But there's a reason why there's a law. It means that the Torah acknowledges, or God acknowledges, that people have that feeling and tendency. So it's a totally separate conversation, is how could there be a restriction, love, and all that? That's another conversation. But I always think it's so important, because when you know that, you also know that there's another important law in Judaism which says we're not the judge, right? Our job is to love people.
Right.
So it's not, if you see somebody doing something that doesn't jive with your understanding of the Torah's laws, it's not my job to tell them off. Although, to continue this conversation, the Torah does say that you should tell off your friends. So why am I saying you shouldn't? Because there's a very powerful teaching. So the Hebrew word is hocheach, tochiach et amitecha. This is a verse. This is not some interpretation. And the rabbis highlight the words amitecha. Who do you tell off? Only someone who's your friend. So if you're that close to somebody that they'll actually listen, and there's an understanding and a conversation will come from it, 100% try to help them be a better person. But if it's just some random person, not only are you not going to help them, you're going to turn them away from you, and it's not going to be any.
Your friend might have.
Well, no,
believe their view.
so hold on. That's why it says clearly a friend, meaning somebody who you actually have a relationship. But I can tell you from today's society, if somebody stopped talking to you because of politics, because you had they were never your friend,
No.
right? They were acquaintances. Maybe you thought they were good friends, but they were never your real friend, because that's not supposed to be something that makes you stop talking to someone. So clearly, that's the proof that that wasn't your friend, because you said your opinion, they didn't like it, and they stopped talking to you. That's not how society is meant to work, right? So that's the idea here. Like I remember, like in any, I'm going to say traditional synagogue after President Obama signed the Love Act, the Marriage Act. I'm sure you walk into traditional synagogues and they blasted it, right? It's like, how dare he? The Torah says this. I mean, you know what the news said for all the Christian evangelical rhetoric. Our answer is that, listen, government does what government does. Our job is to love people. And I still remember, like, there is an organization based, I think, out of New York, but maybe it's Washington, D.C., that their entire goal is to find synagogues for people who, let's say a person is LGBTQ, whichever one they are, and they're moving to Arizona and they want to go to an Orthodox synagogue, and they don't want to test the waters and find out after the fact that they weren't welcoming. And these are the things that they have to worry about. So this organization literally does all the legwork, calls up the synagogue, finds out what their stance is, will they be welcoming, are they going to question them, etc. And sadly, we need organizations like that. But on the other hand, the fact is our job is to love people for who they are. And I always love this line. It has nothing to do with LGBTQ, but there's a rabbi in Australia that has a weekly email that I love. He poses his essays as a question answer rather than an essay, his weekly email. And so he had this question that somebody writes to him and says, my daughter is marrying out of the faith, and it's obviously bothering her tremendously in the question. And what should I do? And in our history, we had people who set Shiva for that. There's people who've taken that to very big extremes. And so he writes, listen, there are 612 other commandments. Focus on those 612, right? This is this. So and that's really that is the Jewish way to look at it, right? This person's doing something that you disagree with, or the Torah, whatever you want to, however you phrase it. That's not the whole, that isn't the entire Torah. That's one mitzvah in the Torah. Yes.
The Bible translation is chastising, but that's my opinion incorrect. The reason why it's incorrect because the root of Hocheach Tochiach is to argue, bikuach, not to chastise. So even when you're supposed to tell them what to do, you're supposed to tell them in a manner which fits them, which is comfortable rather than chastising.
Right, so you're saying the connotation of using the word chastise is very negative.
Very negative, very strong.
Right, it has to come out of love, that's the fact. There's a lot of good Jewish teachings in general on that subject, which by the way, I don't think we answered your question yet, but there's a lot of good, it says, there's a teaching that says, Kamayim hapanim el panim, the way water faces water, Kain lev ha'adam al adam, so too is the heart of a person to another person. The example that, or the meaning behind this is we are a reflection. If I see something negative in someone else, I have that problem too. When you think about that in a Jewish sense and in general, in a life sense, there are things that bother you about people. It says, well, look at yourself first. There's going to be something of that same character within yourself. So yeah, unless you speak with love to yourself, you're not going to gain anything by speaking to the other person. So loving yourself or chastising yourself, whatever that means, you have to work on yourself. The other person's they're going to love you if you speak to them with love.
I've always heard this expression too, having to do with Israel about hugging and arguing.
Loving and liking.
Yeah, and you know, you can't accept it all, but but yeah, it's just the hugging and arguing. I always heard that.
Hugging and arguing. Right. If you love somebody, you can argue. I think that's kind of,
Yeah.
but I think that the short answer is can you love Israel and not like their government is kind of what you're really asking.
Yeah.
Israel is very different.
But see, the government is putting in policies that are not fair to some of the people.
It's funny because I honestly thought you were going to be talking about like the judicial reform. You're talking about like something I haven't read anything about.
No, that's got nothing to do with it. No, it's
Yeah,
more,
I go back to what you said
it's more the issues of how they're
Yeah.
treating the people.
We have the same thing here.
Yeah.
There are laws, things that were done in the previous administration, things being done in this
Yeah.
administration. That I hate the policy, but that doesn't mean that I hate America.
No, but you're discriminating against the people
There are things that we.
That-
every day that
to the point where you're calling them non-Jewish.
But just so you know, the government of Israel doesn't get to determine who's Jewish and who isn't. Unless you're referring to like the conversion side and they're saying if you're gay, you can't convert.
No, they're talking about the community, the people that
Okay.
are Jewish.
I look at that as like, I hear so many people sadly street. Oh, I mean, not
This
my
is-
friends. I'm saying you read the articles, it
This
says
is what's coming.
this person is not Jewish because that's, who cares what they say?
Yeah.
They don't get to determine who's Jewish.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I honestly, I haven't read anything like that, but I know that right now, if you go to Israel and if you drove through one of these communities and they start pelting you with stones and they say you're not Jewish either, and so what?
Yeah.
So what? This guy, I mean, obviously, I don't mean so what, I mean, they're wrong, but like, they don't get to determine who's Jewish.
Yeah.
That's not,
The difference too, for those of us that are Jews, when it comes to Israel, is it's our religion. It impacts us personally in a different way than saying, I don't like everything the president's doing, but I like America, is different than saying, I don't like everything that Israel's doing, but I love Israel, because because people connect Judaism and Israel. They don't connect you personally with America.
Well, I think you have another view here to consider. Prior to the state of Israel being established, 6 million Jews went to their death because they couldn't get out and they didn't have a place to go to. So I would say that I love Israel, if for no other reason, it's my heritage and it's my place to go if there's, God forbid, a situation like this in America.
so then what Rick's saying is sort of more amplified. He's like, wait, so if you're telling me that Israel's not going to accept a Jewish LGBTQ, they don't have that haven that you have.
Well, as far as LGBTQ, that's an issue that is a personal issue. I'm talking about an overall view of a country. and your heritage.
Right. I honestly don't know that that would ever come to not allowing them in. I'm just saying that,
I don't know.
right, I actually
I
have not.
don't know what's gonna happen.
I was on the way here, I was listening to the radio, and they were talking about, so we have Roe v. Wade is repealed, if I could use that word. So what happens? You have a state like Arizona that goes very right. And you have a state like California that says, we're gonna make sure that that can never, if it's our rights, we're gonna make it a right in our constitution. So there will never be a Republican type of legislative body within California that'll be able to repeal that. And that's the same thing that you can talk about with education. You can talk about all these things, because once you give it back to the state, each state chooses what's best for theirs. But those things change, right? We have a roller coaster, and I think in Israel too, by the way.
Oh, it'll eventually change.
Yeah.
Eventually it'll change.
I don't know that it's ever, sometimes you have we have it in America for sure, some very extreme voices, but they really don't control the legislator, although they hijack we could talk about that. But in the end of the day, when you talk about a law being passed, so Israel might have that, somebody who's screaming that from the mountaintop. But I think that it's a fact that even though we call it a very right-wing conservative government, on things like this is not what we mean right-wing. We mean on land and Arabs. We don't mean it in the sense of LGBTQ rights.
Right there isn't right here. But there is a lot of statistics today, going back to what you were saying, that the young people today don't have a connection to
Right.
the land of Israel.
There was big articles about that.
The young people today are anti-Zionist. They're anti-Israel, not the government and whatever. They're anti the idea of a Jewish homeland. If you're going to call Zionism that way, if that's how they're going to define Zionism, they're not going there. So, and that's
Well, the young people today, if you ask that down and talk to them about the Holocaust, they wouldn't know what you're talking about.
exactly.
Or they would say, some idiot professor somewhere said that it never happened. Now, we grew up in that era. We know what happened and what could happen, but they don't see that, and it's understandable. We don't understand what happened in the Civil War. I wasn't alive then, but
Right.
generation going forward.
But young people now today are getting a different view of the Palestinian issue.
Yes, they are correct.
So they are against Zionism because of the Palestinian.
Of the apartheid.
Right, they.
Finger
So,
quotes.
the young Jewish
Yeah.
Because people in
No, that's the Jewish. It's about, in fact, they put it by, when you read those, they talk about denominations, like they break it down.
So a lot of that was learned on the college campus.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, I'm a Jewish college campus. The,
You're getting in 1 sec.
BDS.
the Anti-Defamation League, we had a speaker here in a group that I'm with, saying that teachers unions along the east and west coast have, many of them have come out against BDS.
No, 40.
For BDS, I'm sorry, for BDS. Now, if you take these teachers who are in the classroom who support the BDS movement, and they've got our children and grandchildren from the age of 5 to
Right, of
the age
course.
18, can do an awful lot of.
Now you're talking about another subject about education choice. It's like, but yeah, that's true. You want to,
I was trying to point out that when we talk about love in Israel, there are two types of love, two sources of love. Religious love, it's a holy land, and cultural or traditional love. In Israel, these two are not always agree with action or agree with policy. And that one of the problems Israel has. The way you love them, the people who love Israel the most, if you can use that term, obviously who consider it's a holy land, holy people, holy God, holy everything.
right.
However, the Zionists were not, the original Zionists were not religious at all, most of them.
Right.
And their source was not its holy land, it's our cultural land, it's our historical land, and we should go back. So when we talk about the love of Israel, we should understand that there are two types. I'd like to make another comment. You mentioned it, somebody mentioned the Supreme Court and this whole controversy
Right.
about the Supreme Court. Personally, I think they're doing the right thing because Americans don't realize Israel does not have a constitution. And the court claims to implement the Constitution, but they're not. They're implementing their personal opinion. And that's bad, because if the government decides to do some political action, the court can come in and say, no, you can't do it. Where's your authority to decide that? That is a problem, and I hope that whatever they're trying to do now, they're coming up with a compromise which will make sense and will be equivalent of the Constitution. They should have a Constitution.
Right.
They should have.
No, but we actually have a constitution though. Right.
I mean, personally, I think there should be term limits or age limits on the court. I don't think somebody should be able to be there from the age of 45 to the age of 92.
Right. I think we're gonna fix America's problems today too. I don't want to get it. I think they have a discussion on the first Wednesday of the month for that conversation. I want to address something that you mentioned, which I think is so true. They say, okay, so is anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism the same thing, or can you be anti-Zionist but not anti-Semitic?
Yeah.
And one of the things that they talk about, well, I'm not.
No, you can't. I'm not me, but
Technically, it should be separate, right? But actually what they say is, why is it that a Jew in Germany gets beaten up for a problem in Israel? It's clearly the same thing. So maybe on paper you could say you could hate Israel but love Jews, but it's not how it plays out in reality. That's one of the big things.
Getting beat up because of the political entity Israel and not the Zionist entity of Israel.
Well, why would a Palestinian, I'm just using this example, a terrorist in Germany, shoot Jews?
Okay.
Well, they have a problem with Israel, Zionism, right? So clearly it's.
Israel is called the Jewish state.
right.
And the government, and even some forces that are willing to say, no, it's not. It's a state like any other state. It is not. It is a Jewish state. Consequently, when you hate Jews, you by definition hate Israel.
Yeah.
And when you hate Israel, by definition, you hate Jews. You can't separate. Of course, those who claim that, oh, forget about Judaism, Zionists, that's a different story. But if you believe that it's a Jewish
Of course, you're saying there's going to be perspective on this because of that.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that for sure, when you look at a Jew who is beaten in Germany or in America or any other country for something going on in Israel, there is no way to explain it as separate.
Listen, there are a lot of stupid people. When we came out with COVID, people were beating up Chinese.
Of course.
I-
No, but I'm keeping it on point. It was a question, is anti-Zionism different than anti-Semitism? Can they be separate or not? It's nothing to do with China.
No,
It's a very different. No, you're saying hatred is hatred, but I'm saying, can you say that I don't like Israel? I'm talking about as a non-Jewish person, but I love Jews. That was the question.
you could.
You could. You could say whatever you want. I'm saying as yes. So on that note, there's a great book for those of you who want to read it. It's at least my opinion. It's called Catch the Jew. I've recommended this. I read it and it's like this eye-opening book by an author, Tuvia Tenenbaum. It's not a new book, but it's not too old. And he really kind of highlights these types of things. He is Jewish. He has a German, either he's from Germany originally or he has a German name or something. So he goes into the Jewish areas, the Palestinian areas, and he's a journalist. So they talk to him differently because he's not Jewish. So he brings out this entire different perspective on all of this and what's going on from NGOs and other organizations in regards to Israel. I thought it was a fascinating book. When I speak to friends about it, some people see, everyone thinks it's a fascinating book, but there's two perspectives that come out of it. So if anyone reads it, I'd love to hear. Catch the Jew. Catch the Jew. Catch the Jew. So that'll be an interesting, that's for an Israel conversation. But I think he has an opinion about the Zionism. I might have even read that little quote from him.
What we've had recently is basically inhumanity in this country has grown tremendously. I mean, with the attack on Chinese, my wife was reading the New York Times today. A girl was being beaten up by a group of other girls. A guy interceded. They beat up the guy, they beat the hell out of the girl. Girl went home and committed suicide.
No, it was a teacher, wasn't it?
A couple days ago.
Wasn't it a teacher too that had that story just now?
They showed them.
I think she was a teacher.
I saw girls for 2 years.
She was 14, because there's another story where a teacher was beaten up and she also committed suicide.
The Jewish state come from? I mean, who came up with calling Israel the Jewish state? Where did that come from?
The first Zionist conference,
Called it the Jewish
well,
state?
no, only Jews who came to the first Zionist conference.
Right.
The only Jews. What do you call that conference? They call it Zionism because they tried to avoid what you saying Jewish state.
Right.
But the people were all Jews. The people who were concerned, the people who wanted to do anything about it were not. I don't know.
Because they didn't call
That
it.
was the other prime minister.
But Israel wouldn't exist without being a Jewish state.
I know, but it's the term. I'm just
Including the Orthodoxy,
I'm always stuck with Israel and not the Jewish state, because I think it's bad.
And convert to Judaism and feel obligated or feel desire to go to Israel and settle in Israel.
Well-
Which means for them, being Jew and being Israeli is hard
But
to.
there was never a law that said you couldn't live in Israel, weren't?
No, I hope.
Even in ancient times, there was never a law like that.
So I think it's an unfortunate, what I'm trying to say is, I think it was an unfortunate name, title, whatever. I don't know why.
Well, I think it's you, I'll tell you what, the way I always look at it is, what are the value systems that kind of guide the state of Israel? Are they Jewish or not? And that, by the way, is a very big debate, because if you look at the government, I wouldn't say that the value system is guided by Torah, although many people would like it, let's say.
That's the one side.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying this is kind of the debate. So I don't know that, obviously, as a Jew, you say this is our homeland, so it means it's the Jewish homeland. That's a very simple thing. We're going back to our
We have
land.
We have Israelis who are not Jews.
Of course.
The whole population of Israel, yet not Jews, and nobody says, hey, you gotta convert. There is a separation, and the Israel accepts anybody who wants to live there. You want to be Israeli citizen, I'm sure there are laws, you still American law, come here, you get 5 years, or whatever the law is, and you become a citizen.
It's just like the building we're sitting in, and it's the Jewish community center, right?
There's one
It's
law.
based on Jewish values, right?
Well, that's a very good conversation to be had.
Right.
Is it based on Jewish values?
I mean, I know in the mission statement at our JCC, it literally says based.
I think there's those too, but I'll tell you why I say it's a good conversation to be had. Using just a recent event, JCC Gala, does it have to be kosher food or not?
Should be.
Jewish values, not Jewish laws, those are.
Well, what are our values? What makes this Jewish?
But 25%.
Meaning when I understand that. What makes this, why would, if this has nothing to do with Judaism, I could go to LA Fitness or Lifetime Fitness and save so much money.
I defended that.
Really?
I defended the Jewish for the nonprofit status. I actually had to be a witness to that. And in ours, everything has to be kosher. Our galas were all.
Well, so no, I'm saying that's kind of the conversation.
It's a community.
I know I'm saying, how do we, meaning if it's not about that, then what makes us Jewish? That more Jews should come here than to go to the other gym? The other gym might even be nicer. And might have more Jewish members, right? Depending on what area you live in. Some of the Biltmore Lifetime Fitness is beautiful. I'm sure they have a lot of Jewish members. It's one of their boutique ones. Right. In fact, I always loved it. I think before I knew Kim connected to Jim, their son-in-law, I knew that his kids went to the Bethel preschool. I'm like, wait, are you Jewish? Gallagher.
Right.
Right. It's like, no, it's a good school. It had good hours. Right. Well, why is it a good school? Well, hopefully, I don't know, but hopefully because Bethel is Jewish, they have standards that are to be upheld and they make it into, but obviously it could just be a great preschool director. Don't get me wrong.
But once again, there are lots of standards and we could let the curriculum go aside. We don't have to do us, like, that's only one of the.
Well, if we're, no, I get that. If we're trying to be inclusive, then some of the standards should never be moved. But yeah, that's a good question. I will, yeah.
I'd like to mention the Jewish concept, the Jewish idea there's the law of return, which is unique for Jews, and that presents somewhat of a problem, because people say that not everybody can be a regular citizen, but a Jew can be a citizen the moment he enters Israel. That is a problem, and that is going, I hope it's preserved, for the simple reason to make Israel the Jewish state. That makes Israel a Jewish state, a state for all Jews, wherever you live. I agree with it. Yes, even Israelis say, no, we shouldn't have.
Right. By the way, this is why I like not being in politics. I can have an opinion and it doesn't hurt. No, that's what I'm saying. I understand. I read the same stuff. Right. I understand. You're saying if we want to make sure that it maintains a Jewish identity or Jewish values, to use your word, however that plays out in this governments, then the question is, how do I maintain that? One of them might be the body of the people that live there, maintaining that. I just want to end off on that, and of course you can continue to comment afterwards, but just a thought that I read this week that I actually had never read, and I thought, wow, that's an interesting perspective. So last week's Torah portion is all about Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. And one of the questions that the Talmud asks is like, what did Jethro hear that made him come to the Jews in the desert? The Torah text itself says he heard about the Exodus, like the Jews left Egypt. But the Talmud wants more insight because they say, wait a second, this is a guy who is affluent, wealthy. He's living a cushy, comfortable life. What bug got into him that he would actually leave the comforts of his home, travel to the desert? So they present a number of answers, but one of the answers caught my eye. One of the answers says that he heard about the war with Amalek, Amalek being the nation that attacks the Jewish people after the Exodus. Before, we don't even own land. We're in the desert. Normal wars are about money, about land. So why would a nation attack the Jewish people and they have nothing? And according to this opinion, that's why he went to the Jews. He said that sometimes from seeing the enemies, you learn about the essence of the Jewish people or of the people. And in this case, the Jews. He said, and I thought about that in general. It's like, why do so many people hate us?
I don't know.
Well, that's one answer. I'm saying according to this theory. That's another answer. Right. But he says sometimes you learn about the essence of a person by the people who hate him, right? Not because of especially when a guy hates you for no reason. It's like, if we could literally give the explanation to each reason and say that's not true and that's not, they still hate us. Right. That's why they say in this generation might be because we are very wealthy. 50 years ago, we didn't have money. So what was the reason then? Because we controlled the media, whatever it is. The fact is that this anti-Semitism is why, according to this opinion, is why he joined the Jewish people. So these must be a special people. If a nation is going to go out and fight them and they don't even own land, there's something special about them. I want to be part of them. And I always look at Israel. besides for the fact that we all know this tiny little nation has much more media coverage than any other country in the world. But all of these struggles, this is how I look at it, and this is where I'm turning this idea. All of these struggles, like even what you're saying, that it bothers you that they're talking about changing some of the laws regarding LGBTQ rights, or what makes it a Jewish country, or how do we maintain the identity? What are our values? Just knowing that this is a struggle is what makes it so beautiful, right? We don't have the answers. And if there was a perfect world, maybe we would be able to have all the answers for that. But just knowing that we struggle to find the best solutions is what makes it so unique. In other countries, we wouldn't even blink twice. We don't like what's going on in Saudi Arabia, but we don't say anything. It doesn't bother us. It bothers us. I mean, it doesn't bother us the same way. That's the uniqueness of Israel. And then when you visit it, you can, for example, in how do you respond to that? So either you sit down on your tuchtas, as they say in Yiddish, and you don't do anything about it, or you go to Israel and you volunteer time, you show people that you care, that's not Judaism. However, each one of us kind of, whatever tugs on our string, those are the ways that we're going to put our efforts in making it more meaningful and helping and showing others the love that we care about them. You can't be everywhere. So for one, their charity is going to be with LGBTQ. For another, it's going to be with animals. For a third, it's going to be on the front lines of the war. But it's because of this uniqueness that we truly are unique. It's because of all of this want to make it better and that we struggle with it. That's actually the beauty of it. If there was just apathy and we didn't care, that would be a problem. But this proves that it means something to you, and it proves it means something to you and to each one of us. That's why we care. So to answer your question, what do you do how can you love it? No, that proves that you love Israel. And now the question is, what do you do with those efforts? Or how can I put my time, or for some money, however, each to their own means of making it better? Will we see the changes? We don't know. But we could do our part. That's how I always look at the land of Israel. I mean, if I had the gift of gab, for example, and just the best eloquence, and I would be screaming from wherever I can to get people to understand that no, Israel is not an apartheid state, and this is sadly the necessary evils that have to happen to protect people. Those are the things that, as I'm sure many of you know, Israel is very far behind in the PR war. Right? There's a machine that happens for the other side that is just a huge machine. And I think over the last couple of years, Israel has actually stepped up on that with social media. During any, I'm going to say, flare up, you see the war machine on social media is tremendous. Right? It's not just about shooting missiles into the West Bank or into whatever, Ramallah, whatever part it is. There's a war of let's make sure people know what's really going on. Are they winning? I don't know. But these are where people who have big, broad bases on social media really make a difference. And of course, the adverse is true as well. I mean, if you're going to use, to quote a name, if you're going to take a very beautiful model whose father is Palestinian, and she's going to say to all of her fans how terrible Israel is, those words go very far. People don't know the difference. They look up to her because she's the picture in their bedroom. And now she has more power of speech than the truth, which is always the problem. So I think, to kind of recap your question, I think that teaching is the proof that actually the reason why it bothers you is because you love Israel.
This is under discussion at this time.
What was that?
I mean, it's under discussion.
I haven't read anything about it.
Because Israel has a huge, open gay community.
Oh yeah, it's very big.
Yeah.
And I mean, military, they've had gays in the military for years and years and years and years. And pilots,
Right.
And,
You're saying they're way ahead of our. I do know one of the. Right. I do know that one of the best speeches, I go to the JNF breakfast, and one of the best ones there's always good speakers typically or traditionally, but one of the ones that was most eye-opening for me was, we talk in right and left. That's how most people talk, right? Oh, this is a right-wing government.
Yeah.
And this speaker I think it was Netanyahu then too, because it must have been 5 years ago. So he shared something very interesting that was, he said, we call it right. They're only right on one thing. Let's say, if we want to say conservative relative to us, it's on land and security. But if you talk about social rights and all of the things that our own country is maybe in the middle, maybe swings this, so they're far left. They already give abortion. Their social medicine is way ahead of ours in that regard of looking out for people that are less fortunate. So he's like, yeah, we call them a right-wing government, but they actually align much more with what we call Democrats than Republicans. But when you use the word right, we automatically assume that Netanyahu is actually just as right as Trump or whoever, whatever president name you want to use. And he said, really, this guy aligns much more left, except for this specific thing. So I always, that was very eye-opening for me.
Here, because the most left politicians here are the most right
For Israel. But maybe that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess.
In other words, they can see it because really we do, which is quite fascinating. But I do believe that it's a work in progress. So is our own country. We don't have to tear down statues. I'm using that terminology because that is who we are. We're here today because of all the mistakes or growth that we have made in our past. And if we care, then it bothers us. If we don't care, then it's a different problem. As they say, I feel guilty for not feeling guilty is a very, that's the line. Yes.
Anti-Semitism, you ask, where does it derive from?
I didn't ask that, but
There's a part which is innate. It's there, whether you like, a big part is ignorance. Major ignorance. People don't know.
so I'll tell you, the Purim story is coming up, right? That's the next Jewish holiday. And the Purim story talks about two types of anti-Semites, Haman and Achashverosh. They're both anti-Semites, believe it or not, right? In the beginning of the story, Haman says, I want to kill the Jews. I'll pay 10,000 talents of silver, which is a huge amount of money. And what does Achashverosh say? Go ahead for free. Keep your money. Right. So clearly they're both anti-Semites in the beginning of the story. I don't think we realize that, or we don't focus on that. We focus on Haman, boo, boo, right? But the fact is that Achashverosh in the beginning of the story is an anti-Semite. But he is, like you said, the ignorant anti-Semite. And that is the anti-Semite that you can have a conversation with and explain it's not the way you think. But the Hamans in the world, there's nothing to talk about. And that's really the Purim message. Yeah. So that's the